An American medic defied orders to save German POWs. What he said changed everything. The air, thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the metallic tang of fear, was a constant companion on the battlefields of the Second World War. It clung to uniforms, seeped into the very soil, and choked the breath from those caught in its suffocating embrace. We are conditioned to see war as an abyss, a chasm of pure animosity where humanity is stripped away, leaving only the primal instinct to survive, to destroy. We speak of fronts, of enemies, of victories and defeats, framing the narrative in stark, unforgiving terms. But what if, within that very abyss, flickers of an opposing force, equally primal yet infinitely more profound, also took root? What if, amidst the thunderous roar of artillery and the desperate cries of the wounded, whispers of compassion and acts of unexpected grace carved out their own indelible legacy? This is not a story about grand strategy or military might. It is about the quiet, often unseen currents that run beneath the surface of conflict, the moments where the lines between us and them blur, not through surrender, but through a shared recognition of fundamental humanity. We embark on a journey, not through the grand pronouncements of leaders or the sweeping tides of history, but into the intimate, personal spaces where individual choices illuminated the darkest corners of a world at war. Our focus is on those rare, precious instances where the instinct to harm was overcome by an even more powerful, more enduring impulse. The instinct to connect, to alleviate suffering, regardless of the uniform worn by the one in pain. Consider the sheer, overwhelming chaos of a battlefield. A soldier, trained for combat, conditioned by propaganda, facing an opponent who embodies everything he has been taught to fear and despise. The objective is clear: neutralize the threat. Yet what happens when that threat collapses? Wounded and vulnerable, their eyes mirroring the same terror, the same desperate plea for survival that resides within our own soldier. It is in these fractured seconds, suspended between the ingrained directives of war and the innate flicker of empathy, that the true battle for the soul is waged. This script delves into precisely those moments, the ones that defy easy categorization, the ones that force us to confront the complex, often contradictory, nature of human beings under duress. We will explore a specific narrative, a true account that encapsulates this profound paradox. It centers on an American medic, a man sworn to uphold the Hippocratic Oath, a soldier tasked with aiding his own, but who found himself confronted with a choice that transcended the brutal logic of war. The context is the desperate, grinding struggle of the European front, a landscape scarred by relentless fighting, where life and death were measured in fleeting moments and starkly drawn lines. In this environment, where the enemy was a faceless entity, a symbol of all that was wrong, this medic encountered prisoners of war, men on the opposing side broken and bleeding. The orders were clear, the prevailing sentiment unforgiving. Yet, something within him rebelled against the prevailing tide of animosity. This is where our story finds its anchor, not in a grand battle, but in a single pivotal act. It is the story of defiance born not of rebellion against authority, but of an unwavering adherence to a deeper moral compass. It is about the courage it takes to see beyond the uniform, to recognize the shared vulnerability of being human, even when that humanity is presented in the guise of an adversary. We are drawn into the tension of that moment, the internal conflict, the external pressures, and the ultimate decision that would ripple outwards, leaving an enduring echo. This is not about excusing the horrors of war, but about acknowledging that even within its most brutal manifestations, the capacity for kindness, for profound and unexpected empathy, can persist and even flourish. The journey ahead will weave together the stark realities of combat with the delicate threads of human connection. We will witness the grim realities of the battlefield, the fear, the loss, the pervasive sense of despair. But we will also uncover the unexpected gestures, the acts of selfless compassion that, against all odds, pierced through the darkness. These are not mere anecdotes. They are profound testaments to the enduring resilience of the human spirit, to our innate capacity for empathy, a capacity that, as we will see, can transcend even the most entrenched enmities. This script aims to illuminate these moments, to remind us that even in the face of unimaginable brutality, the light of humanity can, and does, survive. It's a story that challenges our perceptions, prompting us to consider the enduring power of compassion, not as an abstract ideal, but as a tangible force that can shape destinies and leave an indelible mark on the fabric of history. The title itself hints at the extraordinary nature of the narrative we are about to unfold. An American medic defied orders to save German POWs. What he said changed everything. This intriguing premise immediately raises questions. What were the orders? What drove this medic to such an act of defiance? And what, precisely, did he say that held such transformative power? These are the currents that will guide us through the unfolding events, drawing us deeper into the emotional and historical landscape of World War II, not to glorify conflict, but to find within its grim tapestry the enduring, inspiring threads of human goodness. The world was aflame. Across continents, nations clashed in a conflict of unprecedented scale and ferocity. The Second World War was more than a series of battles. It was a cataclysm that reshaped the geopolitical landscape and, perhaps more importantly, tested the very core of human morality. We are often presented with the grand narratives of this war, the strategic maneuvers, the heroic sacrifices, the devastating losses. These are essential to understanding the historical sweep of events. However, beneath the thunderous pronouncements of generals and the sweeping tides of armies lie countless individual stories, often overlooked, yet profoundly resonant. These are the stories of ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances where the choices they made, in moments of extreme duress, revealed the deepest truths about our shared humanity. This script is dedicated to those intimate, often hidden narratives. It seeks to unearth the instances where the brutal logic of war was momentarily suspended by the quiet, persistent force of empathy and compassion. We are not here to sanitize the horrors of conflict or to diminish the suffering endured by millions. Instead, we aim to explore a different facet of this tumultuous period, one that offers a counterpoint to the pervasive narrative of unadulterated animosity. We will delve into true accounts where individuals, on opposing sides of the battlefield, found it within themselves to extend a hand of kindness, to offer a moment of solace, or to make a profound act of forgiveness, even when every instinct and directive screamed for the opposite. The specific focus of our exploration is the Second World War, a conflict that, by its very nature, pitted us against them with an intensity rarely seen before. It was a war fueled by ideologies that dehumanized the enemy, making the act of violence seem not only permissible but necessary. Yet it is precisely within this crucible of hatred and destruction that the most compelling examples of human resilience and compassion emerge. These are not tales of surrender or weakness, but of a different kind of strength. The strength to recognize the shared vulnerability of all human beings. The strength to choose empathy over animosity when the cost of doing so was immense. Our narrative journey will be anchored by a remarkable true story, that of an American medic who, in direct defiance of orders, chose to extend aid to German prisoners of war. This act, seemingly small against the backdrop of global conflict, speaks volumes about the complexities of human nature. It challenges the simplistic dichotomy of hero and villain, good and evil, that often characterizes our understanding of war. Instead, it invites us to consider the nuanced reality of individuals caught in the maelstrom. Individuals who, even when ostensibly on opposing sides, were capable of profound acts of shared humanity. The premise is simple yet powerful. Amidst the chaos and bloodshed, a moment of unexpected grace. An American medic, a healer by profession and by oath, faced a situation where his duty to his own side clashed with his fundamental obligation to preserve life and alleviate suffering. The orders he received, the prevailing sentiments of the time, would have dictated a different course of action, but in that critical juncture he made a choice that defied those expectations, a choice that stemmed from a deeper, more inherent understanding of what it means to be human. This is the specific, unique angle that sets this script apart, exploring the profound impact of individual acts of compassion in the face of overwhelming hostility, and how these acts, however isolated, can resonate far beyond the immediate moment. The context is crucial. We are not speaking of a battlefield where the fighting had ceased, but likely during or immediately following intense combat, a time when emotions would have been raw and the lines between friend and foe starkly drawn. The German soldiers were the enemy, the ones responsible for the suffering and death inflicted upon his own comrades. To extend aid to them would have been seen by many as betrayal, as a violation of the unwritten, and often explicitly written, rules of warfare. Yet, this medic chose a different path. What drove him? Was it a flicker of recognition in the eyes of the wounded soldiers? Was it a deeply ingrained ethical code that transcended the immediate conflict? Or was it something else entirely? A moment of profound connection that bypassed the labels of nationality and ideology. The script will explore these questions, not by offering definitive answers, but by immersing the audience in the emotional and psychological landscape of that decision. We will set the stage for this pivotal moment, hinting at the immense pressure and the stark choices involved, without yet revealing the full scope of the events or the specific words that would prove so transformative. This is an invitation to look beyond the headlines and the historical summaries, to find the pulse of humanity beating even in the most unlikely of places. It's an exploration of how acts of empathy and forgiveness, even between perceived enemies, can survive the ravages of war and offer a powerful message of hope for the future. The journey we are about to undertake is one that promises not only historical insight but also a deep emotional resonance, reminding us that the capacity for kindness is an enduring force, one that can persist and even triumph, regardless of the surrounding darkness. We will begin by immersing ourselves in the immediate, visceral reality of the war, establishing the chilling atmosphere that made such acts of compassion so extraordinary, and then we will witness the moment when one man's choice began to change everything. The year is 1944. The European continent is a vast, blood-soaked canvas, painted with the grim hues of conflict. Cities lie in ruins, landscapes are scarred by trenches, and the air itself seems to vibrate with a perpetual tension, a low hum of dread punctuated by the sudden, brutal thunder of war. It is a time when humanity, in its collective, organized form, had seemingly surrendered to its basest instincts, unleashing a fury that consumed nations and shattered lives on an unimaginable scale. The Second World War was not merely a disagreement between countries. It was a fundamental clash of ideologies, a brutal, all-encompassing struggle where the very definition of human was weaponized, and the enemy was systematically stripped of their personhood, reduced to a target, an obstacle, a symbol of all that was deemed detestable. Within this maelstrom, the battlefield was a realm of stark contrasts. On one side, the desperate fight for survival, for victory, for the preservation of one's own kind. On the other, the relentless, often mechanized machinery of destruction, aimed at neutralizing that very existence. We are conditioned to understand war through this lens of binary opposition: us versus them, right versus wrong, hero versus villain. This framework, while perhaps necessary for the prosecution of conflict, often obscures the more complex, more nuanced realities of individual human experience within its terrifying embrace. It is precisely this complexity, this often unacknowledged capacity for human connection, even amidst profound animosity, that forms the heart of our exploration. This script is an attempt to pierce through that often impenetrable veil of wartime rhetoric and to illuminate the quiet, yet powerful moments of shared humanity that defied the prevailing narrative of hatred. We are not interested in the grand pronouncements of leaders or the strategic triumphs that fill the history books. Instead, our gaze is fixed on the individual, on the soldier in the mud, the medic tending to the wounded, the civilian caught in the crossfire. It is in their personal struggles, their moments of decision, their acts of unexpected grace, that we find a deeper, more enduring truth about our species. We seek to uncover stories where the instinct to harm was momentarily and profoundly overridden by an even more fundamental human impulse, the impulse to connect, to offer solace, to recognize the shared vulnerability that binds us all, regardless of the uniform we wear or the flag we fight under. Our specific focus, the anchor for this narrative, is a true account that encapsulates this paradox with poignant clarity. It concerns an American medic, a man whose profession is inherently tied to healing and the preservation of life. In the brutal theater of the Second World War, he found himself confronted with a choice that would test the very limits of his oath, his duty, and his humanity. The context is the desperate, often brutal, fighting on the Western Front, a landscape where the lines between friend and foe were drawn in blood and etched in the shared trauma of constant conflict. The prevailing sentiment was one of unwavering hostility towards the enemy, a deeply ingrained animosity that fueled the war machine and justified the immense sacrifices being made. In this charged environment, the medic encountered German prisoners of war. These were not abstract enemies. They were individuals, likely wounded, certainly terrified, bearing the physical and emotional scars of battle. The established protocols, the unwritten rules of engagement, and the very real pressures of wartime command would have dictated a particular course of action, one that likely involved treating them with a utilitarian detachment, if at all. Yet, this American medic did something that defied those expectations. He chose to act not solely as a soldier bound by orders, but as a human being moved by an innate sense of compassion. This is the unique angle that this script seeks to explore. The moment when an individual, facing immense pressure and acting in direct defiance of prevailing norms, chose empathy over animosity. It's about the internal struggle, the external risks, and the profound moral courage required to extend a gesture of kindness to those deemed enemies. We are drawn into the suspense of that decision, the palpable tension of a choice that could have significant consequences, and the ultimate words spoken that, according to the narrative, were to change everything. This is not about romanticizing war or suggesting that such acts could erase the suffering it inflicted. Rather, it is about acknowledging the enduring power of human goodness, the flicker of light that can persist even in the deepest darkness, and the ripple effect that a single act of compassion can have. The narrative will unfold not as a dry historical account, but as an emotional and cinematic journey. We will immerse ourselves in the sensory details of the wartime experience, striving to convey the fear, the grit, and the sheer exhaustion that characterized life on the front lines. Against this backdrop of immense hardship, we will then introduce the unexpected moments of connection, the acts of defiance fueled by kindness, and the profound human interactions that transcend the boundaries of conflict. This script aims to inspire, to remind us that even when humanity seems at its worst, the capacity for empathy, for forgiveness, and for reconciliation remains, a testament to our enduring strength and our shared hope for a better future. The story of this American medic and his choices serves as a powerful, poignant example of this truth, a beacon that continues to shine, reminding us that kindness, in its purest form, can indeed survive even the most devastating of wars. The battlefield, a crucible of raw emotion and stark survival, forged an environment where the very definition of enemy was etched in the blood and thunder of combat. Yet, within this maelstrom, the human capacity for an altruistic response, a biological imperative that transcends learned animosity, often asserted itself in unexpected ways. This inherent drive, the willingness to incur personal cost for the benefit of another, even a perceived adversary, is a fascinating area of study. Psychologically, war often amplifies tribalistic instincts, reinforcing in-group loyalty and out-group hostility. However, it also creates extreme situations where the shared experience of suffering can override these ingrained divisions, revealing a deeper, more universal human connection. Consider the psychological underpinnings of the medic's decision. While military training instills a strong sense of duty and loyalty to one's own unit, it cannot entirely extinguish the ingrained biological and ethical predispositions towards caring for the injured. The intense stress of combat, paradoxically, can sometimes heighten empathy by making individuals more attuned to the suffering of others. This heightened awareness, coupled with the immediate physical reality of a wounded human being, regardless of their uniform, can trigger a powerful, almost instinctual response to alleviate that suffering. It's a testament to the complex interplay between learned behavior and innate human drives, where the primal urge to help can surface even when every external factor encourages indifference or hostility. Furthermore, the act of defiance itself requires a significant cognitive leap. It necessitates a conscious override of established protocols and social pressures. This isn't merely a passive act of kindness, it's an active choice to diverge from the expected path, a courageous assertion of personal moral agency. The medic, in that critical moment, likely grappled with the potential repercussions, reprimand, ostracization, or even more severe punishment. Yet the perceived moral imperative to act, to intervene and offer aid, evidently outweighed the personal risks. This internal negotiation, this weighing of duty against conscience, is a profound illustration of ethical decision-making under extreme duress. The specific words spoken by the medic, as the title suggests, were pivotal. While we will explore their precise nature and impact later, it's important to understand the function of such words in this context. In the dehumanizing environment of war, where individuals are often reduced to statistics or symbols, verbal communication can serve as a crucial bridge, reestablishing individual identity and shared humanity. Words of comfort, reassurance, or simple recognition can cut through the fear and animosity, reminding both the giver and the receiver of their fundamental personhood. They can act as a powerful counter-narrative to the prevailing ideology of hatred, injecting a dose of individual truth into the collective madness of war. The broader implications of such acts extend beyond the immediate battlefield. They serve as powerful counter-narratives to the pervasive idea that war inevitably strips all individuals of their humanity. While war undeniably inflicts immense suffering and fosters cruelty, these instances of compassion demonstrate that the capacity for good, for empathy, and for forgiveness can endure. They highlight the critical role of individual choice in shaping the moral landscape of conflict. These are not isolated incidents that negate the horrors of war, but rather crucial reminders that even within its darkest confines, the possibility of grace and connection persists, offering a glimmer of hope and a challenge to our understanding of human nature. Now, consider how this applies when you encounter situations where established norms seem to dictate a harsh or unfeeling response. Ask yourself what deeper human imperative might be calling you to a different path. The inherent drive for altruism, deeply woven into the human psyche, often manifests in subtle yet profound ways, particularly when confronted with extreme adversity. Beyond the immediate biological imperative to care for the injured, there exists a sophisticated ethical framework that underpins these seemingly impulsive acts of compassion. This framework is not solely about alleviating physical suffering. It encompasses a recognition of shared vulnerability, a tacit understanding that the boundaries separating individuals can dissolve in the face of common peril. Consider the concept of moral injury, a term often associated with soldiers who witness or participate in acts that transgress their deeply held moral beliefs. Conversely, acts of profound empathy, like the medic's defiance, can serve as a powerful counteragent to this injury, reinforcing a soldier's belief in their own moral compass and the inherent worth of humanity, even amidst the barbarity of war. Building on this, the medic's action can be understood not just as a deviation from orders, but as an affirmation of a higher ethical standard. While military codes of conduct are designed to ensure operational efficiency and soldier survival, they often operate within a utilitarian calculus that can, by necessity, devalue individual lives deemed expendable or adversarial. The medic's decision, however, suggests a prioritization of intrinsic human value over situational dictates. This aligns with philosophical perspectives that posit universal moral duties, independent of context or allegiance. The act becomes a statement that certain ethical principles, such as the sanctity of life and the duty to alleviate suffering, are not contingent upon the nationality or perceived status of the individual in need. Consequently, when you find yourself in a situation where strict adherence to a rule feels morally discordant, consider whether a deeper, more universal ethical principle might be calling for your attention. Furthermore, the narrative potential lies in exploring the transformative power of such an act. It wasn't just about the immediate relief of suffering for those German prisoners, it was about the potential ripple effect. How did this singular act of defiance influence the medic's own perception of the war, his comrades, and his own role within the conflict? Did it foster a sense of moral clarity amidst the pervasive moral ambiguity of warfare? Conversely, how might the prisoners themselves have been affected? For individuals stripped of their identity, subjected to dehumanizing conditions, and facing constant threat, such an act of kindness could serve as a potent reminder of their own inherent dignity. It might plant seeds of doubt about the absolute nature of the enemy, fostering a more nuanced understanding of the conflict itself, a perspective that could endure long after the battles ceased. Another crucial layer to consider is the psychological resilience fostered by acts of compassion. In the brutal and often traumatizing environment of war, Maintaining one's sense of humanity is a constant struggle. Acts of kindness, even those directed towards enemies, can serve as vital psychological anchors. They provide evidence that moral principles can indeed be upheld, that goodness can persist even when surrounded by overwhelming darkness. For the medic, this act might have been a source of profound personal strength, a confirmation that he was not merely a cog in the war machine but an agent of positive action. This internal reinforcement is critical for maintaining mental well-being and preventing the moral erosion that so often accompanies prolonged exposure to violence. Now, reflect on how moments where you chose empathy over expediency, even when difficult, have bolstered your own sense of integrity and resilience in challenging circumstances. This intrinsic reward, the affirmation of one's own moral core, is a powerful, albeit often unseen, consequence of choosing compassion. The ethical considerations surrounding acts of compassion in wartime extend beyond individual psychological responses to encompass the very fabric of societal reconstruction and the long-term implications for international relations. When a soldier extends kindness to an enemy, it's not merely a personal moral triumph. It's a potent, albeit often silent, act of diplomacy, a prefiguration of potential future reconciliation. Such gestures, when they become known, can subtly erode the monolithic portrayal of the enemy that wartime propaganda so assiduously constructs. They introduce nuance, demonstrating that the other is not a uniform mass of malice, but comprised of individuals capable of suffering, of reciprocity, and even of shared humanity. Consider the historical context of post-war reconciliation efforts. While official treaties and reparations are essential, the true healing of deep-seated animosities often begins at the grassroots level, through personal encounters and shared experiences that humanize former adversaries. The Medic's Act, documented and potentially shared, serves as a micro-example of this broader process. It suggests that the seeds of peace can be sown even amidst the most brutal conflict, not through grand pronouncements, but through small, courageous acts of individual empathy. This process is akin to a surgeon meticulously stitching together torn tissue. Each individual act of connection, however small, contributes to the eventual mending of societal wounds. Now, think about how your own interactions, even in everyday disagreements, can either deepen divisions or begin the process of bridging them. Furthermore, the very act of documenting and sharing such stories, as is the aim of this narrative, plays a critical role in shaping collective memory. History is not merely a record of battles and political shifts. It is also a repository of human experiences, a tapestry woven with threads of both darkness and light. By highlighting instances of compassion, we provide a more balanced and arguably more truthful account of wartime realities. This counter-narrative is vital in combating the simplistic, often overly militaristic portrayals of conflict that can inadvertently glorify violence and obscure the human cost. It's like adding a vital, often missing color to a monochromatic historical painting, revealing the richer, more complex hues of human behavior. The ethical implications also touch upon the concept of virtue ethics, which emphasizes the development of good character traits. For the medic, this act was not just about adhering to a rule or achieving a specific outcome. It was an expression of his cultivated character, his courage, his compassion, his commitment to a higher moral standard. These virtues, when exercised under duress, are not merely abstract ideals, but demonstrable qualities that can inspire others. They demonstrate that even in the most challenging circumstances, individuals can choose to embody the qualities that contribute to a more humane world. Consequently, when you are faced with a choice that tests your character, consider not just the immediate consequences, but the kind of person you aspire to be, and how each decision contributes to that aspiration. The psychological impact on the medic's own unit is another area worth exploring. While his actions might have initially been met with confusion or even disapproval, the long-term effect of witnessing such profound empathy could be transformative. It could foster a more critical perspective on the dehumanization inherent in warfare, encouraging soldiers to look beyond the simplistic enemy label. This can lead to a greater sense of moral clarity and a stronger sense of shared humanity, even among those fighting on the same side. It introduces a crucial element of introspection into the collective mindset of a fighting force, prompting questions about the true nature of the conflict and the ethical boundaries that should remain inviolable. This is not to suggest that such acts would end wars, but they certainly complicate the narrative of absolute animosity and offer a profound counterpoint to the inherent brutality of armed conflict. The profound psychological toll of prolonged exposure to combat frequently leads to a phenomenon known as moral fatigue, where the constant exposure to violence and suffering can erode an individual's capacity for ethical judgment, leading to a desensitization that permits actions previously considered unthinkable. However, the medic's act of defiance serves as a powerful counter-narrative to this pervasive erosion of moral sensibility. It suggests that, even within the most desensitizing environments, individuals can retain a core ethical compass, a capacity for moral reasoning that can assert itself even when it runs counter to prevailing situational pressures. This isn't merely about individual resilience, it's about the enduring power of internalized ethical frameworks, the deeply ingrained principles that can guide behavior even when external structures falter. Furthermore, the strategic implications of such compassionate acts, while seemingly counterintuitive in a war context, can be surprisingly impactful on morale and perception. When news of such actions spreads, even through informal channels, it can subtly undermine the enemy's narrative of absolute barbarity. It introduces a degree of complexity into the enemy's perception of their adversaries, potentially fostering a less monolithic and more nuanced view. Think of it as a subtle form of psychological warfare, not aimed at causing harm, but at planting seeds of doubt and complexity in the minds of the opposing force, a gradual process that can, in the long run, influence the very nature of the conflict and its potential for resolution. Consider, too, the long-term impact on the medic's own unit. Witnessing such an act of defiance rooted in profound empathy can serve as a powerful catalyst for introspection. It can prompt soldiers to question the dehumanizing rhetoric that often accompanies wartime, encouraging them to look beyond the simplistic enemy label. This introspection can foster a more critical perspective on the conflict itself, potentially leading to a greater appreciation for the complexities of human nature. It's akin to introducing a new variable into a complex equation, altering the overall understanding of the problem. Now reflect on situations where you've observed an act that challenged your preconceived notions about a group or an individual. How did that observation alter your perspective? The narrative resonance of such a story lies in its ability to transcend the immediate historical context and speak to universal human experiences. While the specific circumstances of World War II are unique, the underlying themes of compassion, defiance, and the struggle to maintain one's moral integrity in the face of overwhelming pressure are timeless. These are the elements that allow the story to connect with audiences across generations and cultures, reminding us of our shared humanity. It's like finding a common language spoken not in words, but in shared emotional experiences, a language that resonates deeply within the human heart. The medic's choice to defy orders and tend to German prisoners of war represents a profound divergence from the typical operational psychology of warfare, which often emphasizes a strict adherence to protocols designed to maintain combat effectiveness and minimize risk to one's own forces. This adherence, while crucial for military functioning, can inadvertently foster a detachment from the individual suffering of the enemy, framing them as mere obstacles to be overcome rather than fellow human beings. However, the medic's action underscores a phenomenon observed in extreme environments: the emergence of individual conscience as a potent force, capable of overriding ingrained obedience when confronted with a deeply felt moral imperative. This suggests that the human capacity for ethical reasoning is not entirely subsumed by military discipline, but can persist as an internal check, a guiding principle that asserts itself when the stakes of moral compromise become too high. Consider the concept of moral licensing in reverse. Instead of engaging in a positive act that might then allow for minor transgressions, the medic engaged in a perceived transgression, defying orders, to perform a morally imperative act, saving lives. This act, therefore, did not serve as a license for future leniency, but as a validation of his personal ethical framework. It was an affirmation that his commitment to healing and preserving life superseded his obligation to follow a directive that conflicted with that fundamental commitment. This internal recalibration, this prioritization of a higher moral principle, is a critical aspect of maintaining psychological integrity in environments that constantly challenge one's ethical boundaries. Now reflect on how, when faced with a choice that pits a rule against your conscience, prioritizing your internal moral compass can paradoxically strengthen your sense of self and purpose. Furthermore, the impact of such an act on the immediate battlefield environment cannot be overstated. While not altering the strategic course of the war, it could significantly influence the immediate tactical sphere. For the soldiers witnessing this act, it could sow seeds of doubt about the absolute nature of the enemy. It introduces a complexity that challenges the simplistic us versus them dichotomy. This might not lead to immediate fraternization, but it could foster a subtle shift in perception, a recognition that the enemy is comprised of individuals who, like themselves, are susceptible to suffering and capable of receiving kindness. This nuanced view, however small, can have a ripple effect on interpersonal dynamics within the medic's own unit, potentially leading to a more humane approach even in subsequent engagements. The medic's words, the specific utterances that changed everything, likely served a dual purpose. On one level, they would have been directed at the wounded prisoners, offering direct reassurance and alleviating their immediate fear and pain. On another, potentially more significant level, they could have been directed at his own comrades, or even implicitly at the commanding officers who might have witnessed or learned of his actions. These words, therefore, acted as a form of moral articulation, a public declaration of his ethical stance. They framed his defiance not as an act of insubordination, but as an act of profound humanity, a necessary adherence to a higher law. This verbal justification is crucial in navigating the often punitive environment of military command, transforming a potentially punishable offense into a demonstration of moral leadership. The psychological ramifications for the medic himself are also a vital area of exploration. In a profession that constantly exposes individuals to trauma, the ability to act in accordance with one's core values can be a powerful buffer against burnout and moral injury. By choosing to uphold his oath to heal, even when it meant defying orders, the medic likely reinforced his own sense of self-worth and moral agency. This internal validation is paramount in maintaining psychological resilience over the long term, preventing the dehumanizing effects that can often accompany prolonged exposure to the brutal realities of war. It's akin to a diver who, even in the crushing depths, maintains their connection to the surface world. This connection, this adherence to a guiding principle, prevents them from being entirely consumed by the pressure. The medic's decision to aid German prisoners, defying established military protocol, highlights a crucial aspect of human behavior under duress: the capacity for proactive moral reasoning, not merely reactive ethical choices. This isn't simply about a soldier not acting cruelly, but about a conscious, deliberate choice to act compassionately, an active intervention that goes beyond the passive avoidance of harm. Such initiative reveals a deep-seated internal moral compass that actively seeks to alleviate suffering, even when such actions carry significant personal risk. Now think about situations where you've actively sought to mend a fractured relationship or proactively offered support to someone struggling, rather than just waiting for a problem to resolve itself. This proactive engagement is key. Consider the concept of moral courage in this context. It's not merely the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in accordance with one's values despite the presence of fear and potential negative consequences. This is distinct from the courage of combat, which is often driven by duty, camaraderie, or the heat of battle. The medic's courage was of a different order, a quiet, internal fortitude that allowed him to prioritize his ethical convictions over the immediate, tangible pressures of military authority and the prevailing anti-enemy sentiment. This internal fortitude, this unwavering commitment to a personal ethical code, is what allows individuals to transcend the often brutalizing nature of conflict and retain their moral agency. Furthermore, the medic's actions can be viewed as a form of intergroup empathy, a complex psychological phenomenon where individuals extend feelings of care and concern beyond their immediate in-group. In the context of war, where in-group loyalty is paramount and out-group hostility is actively cultivated, intergroup empathy is a rare and powerful demonstration of our capacity to recognize shared humanity. This doesn't necessitate a complete abandonment of one's own side, but rather a selective and context-dependent extension of compassion. It's a testament to the fact that our capacity for empathy is not a finite resource, strictly rationed to our own group, but a boundless potential that can be activated by the recognition of shared vulnerability, regardless of the uniform. The specific words spoken by the medic, as noted, were pivotal. Imagine them not just as words of comfort, but as a form of de-escalation through empathy. In a situation rife with tension and potential hostility, his language likely served to disarm, to humanize, and to establish a connection that transcended the conflict. Perhaps he used simple, direct language that focused on the shared experience of pain or the basic need for survival. Such communication acts as a powerful counterpoint to the dehumanizing rhetoric of war, reminding both the recipient and any observers that beneath the labels of enemy and soldier lie individuals susceptible to the same fundamental human experiences. This linguistic strategy, focusing on shared humanity rather than divisive labels, is a potent tool for fostering understanding. The long-term impact on the medic's own psyche is also a critical consideration. In professions that regularly expose individuals to trauma and moral compromise, maintaining one's ethical integrity is crucial for psychological well-being. By acting in accordance with his deeply held values, the medic likely reinforced his own sense of moral agency and prevented the kind of moral erosion that can lead to burnout or disillusionment. This act, therefore, wasn't just a deviation from orders. It was a vital act of self-preservation, a means of protecting his own ethical core in an environment designed to challenge it. This internal reinforcement, this affirmation of one's own moral compass, is a powerful form of psychological resilience that can sustain individuals through prolonged periods of adversity. The act of defiance by the American medic was not an isolated incident of individual altruism. It was, in many ways, an embodiment of a deeply ingrained human capacity for ethical reasoning that often operates beneath the surface of overt conflict. This capacity is not solely about recognizing shared suffering, but also about a proactive moral imagination. The ability to envision a different outcome, a more humane path, even when the prevailing circumstances seem to dictate otherwise. This imaginative faculty allows individuals to transcend the immediate, often brutal realities of war, and to project a future where compassion, rather than animosity, holds sway. Now, consider how this applies when you face a situation where the immediate pressures push you towards a purely reactive or self-serving response. Ask yourself what alternative, more constructive outcome you can vividly imagine. Furthermore, this proactive moral imagination plays a significant role in fostering resilience within individuals and even small groups amidst prolonged conflict. When soldiers witness or participate in acts of kindness, especially towards perceived enemies, it can serve as a powerful inoculation against the dehumanizing effects of war. It provides tangible evidence that their own moral compass remains intact, that they are not merely instruments of destruction, but agents capable of preserving and extending life. This preservation of self, this affirmation of one's ethical core, is crucial for maintaining psychological equilibrium and preventing the kind of moral fatigue that can lead to profound disillusionment and trauma. The medic's act, therefore, acted not just as a gesture of immediate compassion, but as a vital reinforcement of his own moral identity. Building on this, the influence of such acts can extend beyond the immediate participants, subtly altering the collective perception of the enemy. While propaganda relentlessly paints a monolithic picture of the adversary as inherently evil, these instances of unexpected kindness introduce nuance and complexity. They suggest that the enemy is not a uniform entity but a collection of individuals, each with their own capacity for suffering, resilience, and even compassion. This realization, however subtle, can begin to chip away at the foundations of entrenched animosity, creating fertile ground for potential reconciliation in the future. Think of it as introducing a complex, multifaceted lens through which to view a previously simplistic image, revealing details and depth that were previously obscured. Conversely, the medic's actions also highlight the inherent tension between externally imposed rules and internally held ethical principles. Military structures, by necessity, rely on obedience and adherence to established protocols. However, these protocols are not infallible and can, in extreme circumstances, conflict with fundamental human values. The medic's defiance was not a rejection of authority for its own sake, but a prioritization of a higher moral imperative over a potentially flawed or ethically compromised directive. This suggests that true ethical leadership, even within a hierarchical structure, involves the courage to question and, when necessary, to diverge from established norms when they clash with fundamental principles of human dignity. Another crucial layer to consider is the concept of moral resonance. When an act of profound compassion occurs, particularly in a context where such behavior is rare and unexpected, it can create a powerful emotional and ethical resonance that extends far beyond the immediate participants. This resonance can inspire others, both within the medic's unit and potentially among those who learn of the story later. It serves as a powerful example, demonstrating that even in the darkest of times, the human capacity for empathy and kindness remains a potent force, capable of illuminating the path towards a more humane future. This resonance is not about grand pronouncements, but about the quiet, persistent echo of a virtuous act, reminding us that individual choices have the power to shape not only immediate circumstances, but also the broader moral landscape. The medic's decision to extend aid to German POWs, while a profound act of individual conscience, also served as a subtle yet potent critique of the dehumanizing narratives that permeated wartime propaganda. These narratives, meticulously crafted to portray the enemy as inherently monstrous and devoid of human feeling, were essential for maintaining morale and justifying the immense sacrifices demanded by the war effort. By acting with compassion, the medic implicitly challenged this simplistic dichotomy, suggesting that the enemy, too, possessed the capacity for suffering and could be the recipients of kindness. This act, therefore, was not merely a deviation from military orders. It was a quiet, personal subversion of the ideological framework that sustained the conflict. Now consider how pervasive, simplified narratives in your own life can obscure complex realities, and how a single act of nuanced understanding can begin to dismantle those oversimplifications. Furthermore, the medic's intervention can be understood through the lens of moral burden sharing. In the grim calculus of war, the burden of inflicting harm and witnessing suffering is immense. By choosing to alleviate the suffering of an enemy soldier, the medic effectively shared a burden that might otherwise have been exclusively carried by the wounded individual. This act of shared responsibility, however fleeting, subtly reframes the dynamics of conflict, moving away from pure antagonism towards a recognition of shared vulnerability. It's akin to a conductor stepping in to guide a struggling musician, not to replace them, but to help them find their rhythm again, thereby sharing the performance's inherent challenges. Another crucial layer to consider is the psychological impact on the medic's own unit. Witnessing such an act of profound empathy, especially when it defied established norms, could have served as a powerful counterpoint to the pervasive cynicism and desensitization that often accompany prolonged combat. It offered a tangible example that moral principles could still be upheld, even in the most brutal of circumstances. This could foster a more nuanced understanding of the conflict among his peers, encouraging them to look beyond the simplistic enemy label and to recognize the shared humanity that persisted even amidst the violence. Think of it as a single, clear note of music cutting through a cacophony, drawing the listener's attention to a different, more harmonious possibility. The specific words spoken by the medic, which allegedly changed everything, likely operated on multiple psychological levels. Beyond offering immediate comfort to the wounded, they may have served as a deliberate articulation of his ethical stance, a public declaration that his commitment to healing superseded the dictates of war. This verbal affirmation acted as a powerful assertion of his moral agency, transforming a potentially punishable act of defiance into a principled stand for humanity. It's like a lawyer meticulously presenting a case, not just to the jury, but to the court itself, establishing the ethical foundation of their argument. The long-term implications for the medic's own psychological well-being are also significant. In professions that regularly expose individuals to trauma and moral compromise, the ability to act in accordance with one's core values is a vital component of maintaining mental health and preventing burnout. By choosing to uphold his oath to heal, even at personal risk, the medic likely reinforced his own sense of self-worth and moral integrity. This internal validation is paramount in navigating the psychological complexities of warfare, preventing the kind of moral erosion that can lead to lasting trauma and disillusionment. It's comparable to a skilled artisan meticulously finishing a piece, ensuring its structural and aesthetic integrity, thereby preserving the value of their craft and their own sense of accomplishment. The Medics Act transcended mere battlefield protocol. It delved into the realm of cognitive dissonance reduction, a psychological principle where individuals strive to reconcile conflicting beliefs or behaviors. Faced with a stark choice between the ingrained directive to view the enemy solely as a target and his professional oath to preserve life, the medic experienced significant cognitive dissonance. By choosing to act compassionately, he actively resolved this internal conflict, aligning his behavior with a deeper, more fundamental ethical framework. This resolution wasn't just about alleviating immediate suffering. It was about restoring internal consistency and reaffirming his own moral identity amidst the chaos of war. Now, consider how you might experience this when your personal values clash with an external expectation. Actively choosing to honor your values can bring a profound sense of inner peace. Furthermore, the medic's intervention can be interpreted through the lens of reciprocal altruism, a concept suggesting that acts of altruism, even towards non-kin or perceived adversaries, can foster a predisposition towards future cooperative behavior. While the immediate context was a battlefield, the act itself, by demonstrating a willingness to offer aid without expectation of direct reward, planted a seed of potential reciprocity. This doesn't imply that the German soldiers would immediately cease fighting, but rather that such a gesture, however small, could subtly influence their perception of the opposing forces, introducing a variable of unexpected humanity into the otherwise brutal equation of warfare. Think of it as an unexpected act of kindness in a tense negotiation. It doesn't guarantee agreement, but it can shift the atmosphere and open the door for more constructive dialogue. Another crucial layer involves the concept of moral disengagement, a psychological process that allows individuals to bypass their ethical inhibitions and commit harmful acts. This often involves cognitive distortions like dehumanization, attribution of blame, or minimization of harm. The medic's actions directly countered this process, not just for himself, but potentially for those who witnessed his actions. By choosing to see the wounded soldiers as individuals in pain, rather than as faceless enemies, he actively resisted the psychological mechanisms that facilitate violence. This resistance is vital, as it maintains the individual's ethical awareness and prevents the normalization of brutality. Consider how actively challenging dehumanizing language or stereotypes in your own interactions can help maintain your ethical clarity and encourage more compassionate responses. The specific phrasing used by the medic, as it changed everything, likely resonated because it bypassed the abstract language of war and focused on concrete, shared human experiences. Instead of employing military jargon or ideological pronouncements, he may have spoken in terms of immediate physical needs, pain, or the simple desire for survival. This direct sensory language could have cut through the layers of wartime conditioning, re-establishing a fundamental human connection. It's like a skilled mediator using simple, universally understood terms to de-escalate a heated argument, focusing on common ground rather than divisive rhetoric. This linguistic approach serves to rehumanize the situation, reminding all parties of their shared corporeal reality. The long-term impact of such an act can also be understood in terms of narrative reconstruction. For the medic, this act likely became a cornerstone in his personal narrative of the war, a moment that affirmed his identity and values amidst the moral ambiguity. For his unit, and potentially for the wider historical record, it offered a counter-narrative to the pervasive story of unadulterated brutality. It provided an example of moral fortitude and compassion, demonstrating that even within the most extreme circumstances, the human spirit's capacity for good can assert itself. This act therefore served not just as a single event, but as a pivotal point in the ongoing construction of meaning and memory, shaping how the war, and the individuals within it, would be understood. The medic's act of defiance was not merely a deviation from military orders, it was a profound demonstration of moral licensing in reverse. Typically, moral licensing describes how performing a good deed can sometimes embolden individuals to engage in subsequent, less ethical behavior, as if they've earned a pass. Here, however, the medic undertook an action that, by conventional military standards, might be considered a transgression, aiding the enemy. Yet this very act, undertaken at personal risk, served to reinforce his adherence to a higher ethical code, rather than license subsequent leniency. It was a powerful affirmation of his core values, a validation that his commitment to preserving life superseded the immediate demands of military obedience. Now consider how, in your own life, a difficult but ethically sound decision might bolster your integrity, rather than making you feel entitled to compromise later. Furthermore, this incident provides a compelling case study in the psychological phenomenon of cognitive dissonance reduction. The medic likely experienced significant internal conflict, dissonance, between his professional duty as a healer and his role as a soldier in an adversarial context. By choosing to extend aid to the enemy, he actively resolved this dissonance, aligning his behavior with his deeply held ethical beliefs. This resolution was not merely about avoiding psychological discomfort. It was about maintaining a coherent sense of self, a unified moral identity in an environment that constantly threatened to fragment it. Think about how, when faced with conflicting expectations, actively choosing to honor your core principles can bring a sense of profound inner peace and clarity. Another crucial layer to explore is the concept of intergroup empathy in a high-threat environment. While empathy is often understood as a response to individuals within one's own social group, this medic demonstrated an ability to extend that empathy across a starkly defined enemy line. This wasn't about condoning the actions of the opposing forces, but about recognizing the shared human experience of pain, fear, and vulnerability. This capacity to bridge the perceived chasm between groups, even in the crucible of war, highlights the deeply ingrained human drive to connect and alleviate suffering, regardless of artificial boundaries. Imagine encountering someone from a group you've been taught to distrust. Consider how focusing on their shared humanity rather than their group affiliation can shift your entire perspective. The medic's words, which allegedly changed everything, likely served as a powerful form of de-escalation through shared humanity. In a context saturated with animosity and fear, his language probably bypassed military jargon and ideological rhetoric, focusing instead on simple, universally understood appeals to basic human needs and experiences. By acknowledging the shared vulnerability of being wounded or the common desire for survival, he effectively humanized the situation for both the prisoners and any observers. This linguistic strategy, emphasizing common ground over divisive labels, is a potent tool for fostering understanding and momentarily suspending the hostilities. It's akin to a mediator using simple, direct language to bridge a heated dispute, focusing on the immediate, tangible reality of the situation. The long-term impact on the medic's own psychological resilience is also noteworthy. In professions that frequently expose individuals to trauma and moral compromise, the ability to act in accordance with one's fundamental values serves as a critical buffer against burnout and moral injury. By choosing to uphold his oath to heal, even when it meant defying orders, the medic likely reinforced his own sense of moral agency and prevented the kind of psychological erosion that can accompany prolonged exposure to violence. This internal validation is paramount for maintaining mental well-being, akin to an artist ensuring the structural integrity of their work, thereby preserving its lasting value and their own sense of accomplishment. The medic's act was more than just a spontaneous outburst of kindness. It was a deliberate application of situational ethics, where an individual's moral framework adapts to the unique pressures and realities of a specific context. In the extreme environment of the battlefield, where abstract moral principles often clash with immediate survival needs, the medic demonstrated an ability to discern the most ethically sound course of action, even when it contradicted established rules. This involved a sophisticated cognitive process of weighing competing values, duty to command versus the intrinsic value of human life. He didn't discard his ethical compass. He recalibrated it to navigate the treacherous moral terrain of war, prioritizing the fundamental imperative to heal over the situational directive to engage the enemy. Now consider how you might apply this principle when faced with a choice where a strict adherence to a policy feels morally questionable. Actively seek to understand the unique circumstances and discern the most ethically sound path forward, even if it requires a nuanced interpretation of the rules. Building upon this, the medic's intervention can be understood as an act of moral decoupling, albeit in a positive direction. Typically, moral decoupling allows individuals to distance themselves from the ethical implications of their actions, often by dehumanizing the victim or diffusing responsibility. The medic, conversely, engaged in a form of ethical recoupling. He actively chose to acknowledge the humanity of his adversaries, thereby refusing to decouple himself from the ethical responsibility to alleviate suffering. This refusal to morally disengage, even when surrounded by pervasive dehumanization, underscores the deep-seated human inclination towards ethical engagement. Think about how, when confronted with situations that encourage you to dismiss or dehumanize others, you can actively choose to remain ethically engaged, recognizing the shared humanity in every individual. Furthermore, the impact of such an act extends to the psychological phenomenon of vicarious resilience. When individuals witness acts of profound courage and compassion, particularly those that defy overwhelming adversity, it can bolster their own sense of hope and their belief in the possibility of positive human action. For the soldiers observing the medic, his willingness to extend aid to the enemy, despite the risks, could have served as a powerful source of vicarious resilience. It demonstrated that even within the brutal realities of war, individuals could retain their moral integrity and act with profound humanity. This, in turn, could strengthen their own resolve to uphold their values, even when facing immense pressure to conform to more brutal norms. Imagine witnessing an act of extraordinary kindness in a difficult situation. Consider how that observation might strengthen your own belief in the goodness of people and your own capacity for similar actions. The medic's words, which allegedly changed everything, likely functioned as a powerful framing device. In essence, they reframed the situation from one of adversarial conflict to one of shared human experience. Instead of emphasizing the differences between combatants, his language probably focused on common vulnerabilities, pain, injury, the need for care. This reframing shifted the perception of the encounter, moving it away from a purely military engagement and towards a humanitarian one. It's akin to a skilled negotiator who, instead of focusing on points of contention, redirects the conversation towards areas of mutual interest, thereby altering the entire dynamic of the discussion. The long-term implications for the medic's personal narrative are also significant. Such an act, undertaken at considerable personal risk, would likely become a defining moment, a testament to his character that he could draw upon throughout his life. It provided him with an internal anchor, a tangible instance of his ability to act according to his deepest convictions, even when faced with immense external pressure. This self-affirmation is crucial for maintaining a stable sense of identity and purpose, especially for individuals who have experienced the moral complexities and traumas of war. Consider how a moment where you stood firm on your principles, despite difficulty, continues to inform your sense of self and your future choices. This is the power of narrative reinforcement. The medic's decision to defy orders and aid enemy combatants wasn't merely an act of personal conviction. It was a profound engagement with the concept of moral licensing in a counterintuitive way. Typically, moral licensing suggests that performing a good deed can sometimes grant individuals a psychological pass to later engage in less ethical behavior, as if they've accumulated moral credits. However, in this instance, the medic undertook an action that, by the strict letter of military law, could be seen as a transgression, assisting the enemy. Yet this very act, performed at significant personal risk, served not to license future leniency, but to reinforce his adherence to a higher ethical standard. It was a powerful affirmation that his core values, particularly his commitment to preserving life, superseded the immediate demands of military obedience. Now consider how, in your own life, a challenging but ethically sound decision might not only resolve a conflict, but also fortify your commitment to your principles, rather than making you feel entitled to compromise later. Furthermore, this intervention can be understood as a deliberate counterpoint to moral decoupling, a psychological mechanism that allows individuals to distance themselves from the ethical implications of their actions, often by dehumanizing the victim or diffusing responsibility. The medic, conversely, actively engaged in ethical recoupling. He refused to morally disengage from the suffering of the enemy soldiers. By recognizing their shared humanity and acting to alleviate their pain, he refused to permit the psychological distance that often facilitates violence. This active re-engagement with ethical responsibility, even when it involved perceived adversaries, underscores the innate human drive to connect and to act with compassion. Think about how, when faced with situations that encourage you to dismiss or dehumanize others, You can actively choose to remain ethically connected, recognizing the shared humanity that transcends group affiliations. Another critical layer involves the phenomenon of vicarious resilience. When individuals witness acts of extraordinary moral courage, particularly those that defy overwhelming adversity, it can significantly bolster their own sense of hope and their belief in the potential for positive human action. For the soldiers observing the medic, his willingness to extend aid to the enemy, despite the potential repercussions, could have served as a potent source of vicarious resilience. It provided tangible evidence that moral integrity could be maintained, even within the brutalizing context of war. This, in turn, could strengthen their own resolve to uphold their values, offering a quiet but powerful counter-narrative to the pervasive pressures that often encourage conformity to more brutal norms. Imagine witnessing an act of profound kindness in a situation fraught with animosity. Consider how that observation might strengthen your own belief in the inherent goodness of people and your own capacity for similar actions. The medic's words, which allegedly changed everything, likely functioned as a potent reframing mechanism. Instead of employing the adversarial language of war or the impersonal terminology of military objectives, his communication probably focused on universal human experiences, pain, injury, the basic need for care. This linguistic strategy effectively shifted the perception of the encounter, moving it away from a purely military confrontation and towards a shared human experience. It's analogous to a skilled mediator who, instead of dwelling on points of contention, skillfully redirects the conversation toward common ground and shared needs, thereby altering the entire dynamic of the interaction. The long-term implications for the medic's personal narrative are also significant. Such an act, undertaken at considerable personal risk, would likely become a defining moment, a testament to his character that he could draw upon throughout his life. It provided him with an internal anchor, a tangible instance of his ability to act according to his deepest convictions, even when faced with immense external pressure. This self-affirmation is crucial for maintaining a stable sense of identity and purpose, especially for individuals who have navigated the moral complexities and traumas of war. Consider how a moment where you stood firm on your principles despite significant difficulty continues to inform your sense of self and your future choices. This is the power of narrative reinforcement in shaping one's enduring identity. The medic's choice to intervene was not simply an act of compassion. It was a strategic assertion of individual agency within a system designed to suppress it. Military structures, by their very nature, necessitate obedience and adherence to established protocols, often prioritizing collective objectives over individual exceptions. However, in extreme circumstances, the individual's capacity for ethical discernment can become a critical, albeit often unacknowledged, counterweight. The medic's intervention demonstrated that while external directives are powerful, an internalized moral framework, when sufficiently robust, can guide actions even when they diverge from the prescribed path. This is not about outright rebellion, but about a nuanced understanding of duty where adherence to a higher ethical principle can, in specific instances, supersede a lower-level command. Now, consider how you might navigate situations where a rigid rule seems to conflict with your deeply held sense of fairness. Actively seek to understand the underlying purpose of the rule and whether a more ethically aligned interpretation is possible. Furthermore, this act can be viewed through the lens of moral burden transference. In the brutal economy of war, the burden of inflicting harm and witnessing suffering is immense. By choosing to alleviate the pain of an enemy soldier, the medic, in a sense, transferred a portion of that burden. He didn't absolve the enemy of their role in the conflict, but he refused to allow the wounded soldier to bear the sole burden of his suffering without any attempt at mitigation. This act subtly shifted the dynamic, moving away from a purely adversarial exchange towards a moment of shared human experience, however brief. It's akin to a skilled mediator stepping in to help two parties in a dispute find common ground, thereby sharing the emotional weight of their conflict. Another crucial layer to consider is the impact on the medic's own unit, fostering what can be termed observational ethical learning. When soldiers witness acts of profound compassion, especially those that defy prevailing norms, it can serve as a powerful practical lesson in ethical behavior. This observation can reinforce their own moral compasses, demonstrating that adherence to ethical principles is possible even in the most challenging environments. It provides a concrete example of moral courage, offering a counter-narrative to the pervasive pressures that might otherwise encourage conformity to more brutal or indifferent behaviors. Imagine observing someone perform an act of extraordinary kindness in a tense or hostile situation. Consider how that observation might reinforce your own belief in the power of empathy and your own capacity to act similarly. The medic's words, which reportedly changed everything, likely functioned as a potent cognitive reframing tool. Instead of employing the adversarial language of war or the impersonal terminology of military objectives, his communication probably focused on universal human experiences, pain, injury, the fundamental need for care. This linguistic strategy effectively shifted the perception of the encounter, moving it away from a purely military confrontation and towards a shared human experience. It's analogous to a skilled negotiator who, instead of dwelling on points of contention, skillfully redirects the conversation toward common ground and shared needs, thereby altering the entire dynamic of the interaction. The long-term implications for the medic's personal narrative are also significant. Such an act undertaken at considerable personal risk would likely become a defining moment, a testament to his character that he could draw upon throughout his life. It provided him with an internal anchor, a tangible instance of his ability to act according to his deepest convictions, even when faced with immense external pressure. This self-affirmation is crucial for maintaining a stable sense of identity and purpose, especially for individuals who have navigated the moral complexities and traumas of war. Consider how a moment where you stood firm on your principles, despite significant difficulty, continues to inform your sense of self and your future choices. This is the power of narrative reinforcement in shaping one's enduring identity. The medic's decision to extend care to enemy combatants, while seemingly an act of pure empathy, also functioned as a subtle yet powerful mechanism for ethical self-preservation. In the dehumanizing crucible of war, where witnessing and perpetrating violence can lead to profound psychological scarring, the act of choosing compassion served as an affirmation of the medic's own humanity. It was an internal bulwark against the corrosive effects of conflict, a conscious act of retaining one's moral core when the surrounding environment sought to strip it away. This wasn't about seeking personal glory, but about maintaining psychological integrity, ensuring that the horrors he witnessed did not fundamentally alter his own moral compass. Now, consider how, when faced with morally compromising situations, actively choosing to uphold your values can act as a vital form of psychological self-protection, preventing burnout and maintaining your sense of purpose. Furthermore, this intervention introduced a critical element of situational nuance into the otherwise rigid binary of wartime morality. Military directives, by necessity, operate on broad strokes, establishing general principles for conduct. However, the battlefield is a realm of infinite variables where abstract rules can often fail to account for the complexities of individual circumstances. The medic's choice demonstrated an ability to perceive and act upon these nuances, recognizing that the immediate physical needs of a wounded soldier could, in that specific moment, supersede the broader dictates of wartime strategy. This capacity for nuanced ethical judgment is vital in navigating environments where black and white thinking can lead to unintended cruelty. Think about how, in complex personal or professional situations, moving beyond rigid rules to consider the specific context can lead to more just and compassionate outcomes. Another crucial layer involves the concept of reciprocity as a long-term societal impact. While the immediate context was one of active conflict, the act of extending aid to an enemy soldier, even if not immediately reciprocated in kind, plants a seed for future reconciliation. It introduces a precedent, a tangible example that cooperation and kindness are possible even across deep divides. This doesn't negate the realities of war, but it lays a subtle groundwork for the possibility of peace, demonstrating that the shared experience of vulnerability can, over time, foster a recognition of common humanity. Imagine how a single act of unexpected generosity in a tense negotiation can subtly alter the atmosphere, paving the way for future compromise. This is a micro-example of that broader societal potential. The medic's words, which reportedly changed everything, likely achieved their impact by serving as a powerful cognitive reframing tool. Instead of employing the adversarial language of war or the impersonal terminology of military objectives, his communication probably focused on universal human experiences: pain, injury, the fundamental need for care. This linguistic strategy effectively shifted the perception of the encounter, moving it away from a purely military confrontation and towards a shared human experience. It's analogous to a skilled mediator who, instead of dwelling on points of contention, skillfully redirects the conversation toward common ground and shared needs, thereby altering the entire dynamic of the interaction. The long-term implications for the medic's personal narrative are also significant. Such an act, undertaken at considerable personal risk, would likely become a defining moment, a testament to his character that he could draw upon throughout his life. It provided him with an internal anchor, a tangible instance of his ability to act according to his deepest convictions, even when faced with immense external pressure. This self-affirmation is crucial for maintaining a stable sense of identity and purpose, especially for individuals who have navigated the moral complexities and traumas of war. Consider how a moment where you stood firm on your principles, despite significant difficulty, continues to inform your sense of self and your future choices. This is the power of narrative reinforcement in shaping one's enduring identity. The medic's intervention, though rooted in empathy, also served as a powerful act of moral insulation. In the extreme psychological environment of war, where constant exposure to violence can lead to desensitization and moral fatigue, the deliberate choice to act compassionately acts as a shield. It preserves the individual's ethical core, preventing the corrosive effects of prolonged exposure to brutality. This isn't merely about avoiding personal trauma. It's about maintaining the capacity for positive ethical engagement, ensuring that the individual does not become irrevocably hardened by the experience of conflict. Now consider how, when you face situations that challenge your ethical boundaries, actively choosing a response aligned with your core values can protect your inner sense of integrity and prevent emotional exhaustion. Furthermore, this act highlights the concept of counter-normative influence. Military environments often foster strong group norms that can pressure individuals towards conformity, even if those norms are ethically questionable. The medic's defiance, however, introduced a counter-normative influence, demonstrating that alternative behaviors, rooted in compassion and ethical principle, were not only possible, but in his view, imperative. This subtle challenge to the prevailing groupthink can, over time, create space for more nuanced ethical considerations within a unit, suggesting that adherence to a higher moral law can, in certain circumstances, supersede adherence to immediate group pressures. Think about how a single individual's principled stand, even when initially unpopular, can gradually shift perceptions and open the door for alternative viewpoints within a group. Another critical layer involves the long-term psychological benefits of moral action. For the medic, the act of extending aid, despite the risks, likely resulted in a profound sense of self-efficacy and moral coherence. In a situation rife with moral ambiguity and the potential for psychological distress, acting in accordance with one's deepest values provides a powerful sense of validation and purpose. This reinforces positive self-perception and contributes to greater psychological resilience, preventing the kind of disillusionment that can arise from feeling powerless or morally compromised. Imagine how, after successfully navigating a difficult ethical dilemma by staying true to your principles, you experience a renewed sense of confidence and clarity. This internal reward is a significant benefit of moral action. The medic's words, which reportedly changed everything, likely functioned as a potent cognitive reframing tool. Instead of employing the adversarial language of war or the impersonal terminology of military objectives, his communication probably focused on universal human experiences: pain, injury, the fundamental need for care. This linguistic strategy effectively shifted the perception of the encounter, moving it away from a purely military confrontation and towards a shared human experience. It's analogous to a skilled mediator who, instead of dwelling on points of contention, skillfully redirects the conversation toward common ground and shared needs, thereby altering the entire dynamic of the interaction. The long-term implications for the medic's personal narrative are also significant. Such an act, undertaken at considerable personal risk, would likely become a defining moment, a testament to his character that he could draw upon throughout his life. It provided him with an internal anchor, a tangible instance of his ability to act according to his deepest convictions, even when faced with immense external pressure. This self-affirmation is crucial for maintaining a stable sense of identity and purpose, especially for individuals who have navigated the moral complexities and traumas of war. Consider how a moment where you stood firm on your principles, despite significant difficulty, continues to inform your sense of self and your future choices. This is the power of narrative reinforcement in shaping one's enduring identity. Reflecting on this journey through the fragmented landscapes of war, we've encountered echoes of a profound paradox. The very forces that sought to divide and destroy, that aimed to strip away individuality and reduce human beings to mere instruments of conflict, also, in their extreme pressure, revealed an astonishing countercurrent. It's as if the sheer intensity of the struggle, the stark confrontation with mortality, stripped away artifice and revealed something fundamental, something that persisted even when all else seemed lost. We've observed how the ingrained structures of command and the pervasive narratives of enmity, while powerful, were not absolute determinants of human behavior. Instead, they often served as the very backdrop against which the resilience of individual conscience and the enduring capacity for connection could shine with even greater luminescence. In light of these insights, the path forward towards a final understanding begins to clarify, not through a simple recounting of events, but through a synthesis of the forces at play. Consider the way disparate elements, like threads in a complex tapestry, have converged. The inherent biological predispositions towards empathy, the sophisticated ethical frameworks that guide human judgment even under duress, and the sheer, undeniable reality of shared vulnerability in the face of existential threat, have all woven together to create a narrative far richer and more nuanced than the stark dichotomy of war typically allows. It's akin to observing how individual brushstrokes, seemingly disparate on their own, coalesce to form a coherent and impactful image, revealing a depth and texture previously unseen. As we pivot towards the final reflection, the cumulative effect of these explored ideas becomes palpable. It's not simply about isolated instances of kindness, but about the underlying currents that made them possible, and the subtle yet significant ways they rippled outwards. The tension between imposed order and innate morality, the struggle to maintain one's ethical core amidst pervasive dehumanization, and the profound impact of individual choices in shaping perceptions. These are not isolated phenomena, but interconnected facets of the human experience under extreme pressure. They form a constellation of understanding, guiding us towards a more comprehensive perspective on resilience, connection, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Even when tested to its absolute limits, the journey has illuminated not just the darkness, but the unexpected, persistent light that can emerge from within it. The echoes of humanity, even amidst the cacophony of war, resonate not as a testament to the absence of conflict, but to the indomitable presence of something far more profound. We have journeyed through the scarred terrain of history, not to glorify the battles, but to unearth the quiet, persistent embers of compassion that glowed in the deepest trenches. The narrative of war often paints with broad, brutal strokes, reducing individuals to statistics and enemies to faceless adversaries. Yet, beneath this veneer of animosity, the human heart, in its irreducible complexity, continued to beat with a rhythm of connection, of empathy, and of an almost defiant kindness. What we have witnessed is not a refutation of the horrors of war, for those remain undeniable. Rather, it is an affirmation that the human spirit, when tested to its absolute limits, possesses an extraordinary capacity to transcend the very forces that seek to diminish it. The American medic's choice, his defiance of orders to extend a hand of healing to those designated as enemies, was not an isolated anomaly. It was a powerful, tangible manifestation of an innate drive, a drive to alleviate suffering, to recognize shared vulnerability, and to affirm the intrinsic worth of every human life, regardless of the uniform they wore. This act, and countless others like it, serve as vital counter-narratives to the pervasive dehumanization that war engenders, reminding us that even in the darkest hours, the light of our shared humanity can persist. The true impact of these moments lies not in their ability to end wars, for that is a task of immense complexity and multifaceted effort, but in their enduring power to survive them. Kindness, in its purest form, does not erase the scars of conflict, but it does offer a profound testament to our capacity for grace. It whispers that even when our actions are dictated by the brutal logic of survival, Our fundamental nature, our deepest impulses, can still call us towards connection and care. This capacity for empathy, for forgiveness, and for reconciliation, however fleetingly expressed in the heat of battle, is the enduring legacy that transcends the immediate violence. It is the echo that reverberates long after the cannons fall silent, reminding us of what truly defines us. The exploration has illuminated that the strength of the human spirit is not solely measured by its capacity for combat, but perhaps more significantly, by its unwavering ability to hold on to compassion, even when surrounded by despair. This enduring light, this quiet rebellion against animosity, is not a sign of weakness, but of a profound, unyielding strength. It suggests that while external forces may shape our circumstances, the internal compass of our humanity remains a powerful, guiding presence. The stories we have uncovered are not mere historical footnotes. They are living testaments to this enduring truth, urging us to recognize and nurture this spark within ourselves and within our communities. The true practice begins now, to carry these echoes forward, to seek out and cultivate these moments of connection, and to remember that even in the most challenging of times, the capacity for profound human kindness is not extinguished, but merely waiting for the right moment to shine.